Sarah Miller stood in the cold office, tears streaming down her face. Her hands shook as she stared at her supervisor, Mrs. Patterson, who held a termination letter like a weapon. "You're fired, Sarah." "I don't care about your excuses anymore," Mrs. Patterson said, her voice sharp and final. Sarah's heart dropped. She stepped forward, her voice breaking. "Please, my daughter needs this job. I can explain why I was late," but Mrs. Patterson raised her hand, cutting her off. "I don't want to hear it. Security will escort you out." The room felt like it was spinning. 3 years of hard work, of arriving early and staying late, of scrubbing floors until her hands bled, all of it was ending in this single moment. Sarah thought about her 8-year-old daughter Emma at home, waiting for her. She thought about the $43 left in her wallet and the $200 she needed for Emma's asthma medication. But here's what Sarah didn't know. That morning, when she stopped to help an injured man on the sidewalk, when she made herself late to save a stranger's life, she had no idea who that man really was. She had no idea that her act of kindness was about to change everything. If you want to see how this story unfolds, hit that subscribe button right now because what happens next will blow your mind. Now, let me ask you something. Have you ever been punished for doing the right thing? Drop your answer in the comments below. Let me tell you about Sarah Miller. She's 32 years old, a single mother raising her 8-year-old daughter Emma all by herself. For the past 3 years, Sarah has worked as a cleaner at Richardson Tech Company. Not just any cleaner, the kind of employee every company dreams of having. Sarah always arrived early. She never complained, not even once. When other workers called in sick, Sarah volunteered for double shifts. When new employees felt lost and alone, Sarah was the first person to welcome them with a warm smile and a helping hand. Everyone at Richardson Tech knew Sarah's name, and everyone had a story about how she'd helped them. But behind that smile was a constant struggle. Every month, Sarah counted every single dollar, trying to make ends meet. Emma had asthma, and her medication cost $200 a month. Some nights, Sarah skipped dinner so Emma could have seconds. Some weeks, Sarah wore shoes with holes in them because Emma needed new school supplies. But Sarah never gave up. She had one dream that kept her going, giving Emma a better life than she had. That morning started like every other morning. Sarah's alarm went off at 5 a.m. She dragged herself out of bed, made Emma's breakfast, and kissed her sleeping daughter goodbye. Then she rushed out the door to catch the first of 2 buses she needed to take to get to work by 7 a.m. The first bus ride went smoothly. The second bus was running on time. Sarah was actually going to be early for once. She smiled to herself, thinking maybe today would be a good day. But then, as the bus stopped at a red light, Sarah looked out the window and saw him. An older man, maybe 60 years old, collapsed on the sidewalk. His head was bleeding, and he wasn't moving. People walked past him. One woman glanced down and kept walking. A man in a suit stepped over him like he was a piece of trash. Another person pulled out their phone, took a picture, and walked away. Sarah's heart started racing. She looked at her watch. 6:50 a.m. If she stopped, she'd be late. If she was late again, Mrs. Patterson had made it very clear, there would be consequences. But then Sarah looked back at the man on the ground. He could be dying. He could be someone's father, someone's husband. What if that was her lying there? Would she want everyone to just walk past? The bus doors opened. Sarah stood up. Her hands gripped the pole, and for a moment, she froze. "I'll be late for work," she whispered to herself. "But I can't leave him." She stepped off the bus and ran to the man's side. Behind her, the bus pulled away, taking her chance of being on time with it. Sarah knelt down beside the man. He was about 60 years old, wearing an expensive suit that was now covered in dirt and blood. His gray hair was messy, and a deep cut on his forehead was bleeding badly. His eyes were half closed, and he looked confused, like he didn't know where he was. "Sir, can you hear me?" Sarah said, her voice steady even though her hands were shaking. The man groaned but didn't answer. Sarah didn't waste time. She pulled off her scarf, the one Emma had given her for Christmas, and pressed it gently against his wound. With her other hand, she pulled out her phone and dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? There's a man collapsed on the sidewalk at 5th and Main Street. He's bleeding from his head and he's not fully conscious. Please send an ambulance right away. Help is on the way, ma'am. Stay with him. Sarah put her phone down and kept pressure on the wound. The man's eyes opened a little more. He looked up at her, trying to focus. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice weak and raspy. What's your name?" Sarah smiled at him, trying to keep him calm. "Sarah Miller. Don't worry, sir. Help is coming. You're going to be okay." The man nodded slowly. He reached into his jacket pocket with trembling fingers and pulled out a business card. He tried to hand it to Sarah, but his hand was shaking so badly that the card slipped through his fingers and fell to the ground. Sarah saw it fall, but she didn't pick it up. She was too focused on keeping pressure on his wound, on making sure he stayed awake, on watching for the ambulance. "Stay with me, sir," she said softly. "Keep your eyes open. What's your name?" But before he could answer, the sound of sirens filled the air. The ambulance pulled up, and 2 paramedics jumped out with a stretcher. "We've got him, ma'am," one of the paramedics said. "Thank you for staying with him." Sarah stepped back as they worked quickly, checking his vital signs and loading him onto the stretcher. The man looked at her one more time as they lifted him up. "Thank you, Sarah Miller," he whispered again. Sarah watched as they put him in the ambulance and drove away, sirens blaring. Only then did she remember to breathe. Only then did she look down at her scarf, now soaked in blood. Only then did she check her watch. 7:45 a.m. Her heart sank. She was 45 minutes late. Sarah ran to the bus stop, hoping and praying that somehow, Mrs. Patterson would understand. But deep down, she knew the truth. She knew what was waiting for her at Richardson Tech Company. If you're loving this story so far, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. Sarah burst through the doors of Richardson Tech Company at 7:45, her heart pounding in her chest. She was sweating, out of breath, and still had blood on her hands from helping the injured man. "Mrs. Patterson, I'm so sorry I'm late," Sarah said, rushing toward her supervisor. "Please, let me explain." Mrs. Patterson stood there with her arms crossed, her face twisted in anger. "This is the 3rd time this month, Sarah." I know, but this time," Sarah tried to catch her breath. "I helped an injured man on the street. He was bleeding and unconscious. He could have died if I didn't stop." "I don't want to hear your stories," Mrs. Patterson interrupted, her voice cold as ice. "You're unreliable. That's all I need to know." "But Mrs. Patterson, enough." Mrs. Patterson's voice echoed through the hallway. Other cleaners had gathered around, watching the scene unfold. Maria, one of Sarah's coworkers, stepped forward. "Mrs. Patterson, please. She's the hardest worker here. Sarah never complains, she takes extra shifts, she helps all of us." Another cleaner named Tom joined in. "She's telling the truth. Sarah wouldn't lie about something like this." Mrs. Patterson didn't even look at them. "That's not my problem. I have rules to follow, and those rules say if you're late 3 times, you're done." She pulled out a white envelope from her clipboard and held it in front of Sarah's face. "A termination letter." "No, please," Sarah's voice cracked. She could feel tears building up in her eyes. "Mrs. Patterson, my daughter has asthma. I need this job for her medication. She needs me." "You should have thought about that before being late," Mrs. Patterson said, shoving the letter into Sarah's hands. Sarah stood there, frozen, staring at the paper that was ending her life as she knew it. The words blurred through her tears. "Security!" Mrs. Patterson called out. 2 security guards appeared from around the corner. They looked uncomfortable, like they didn't want to do this. "Escort Ms. Miller out of the building," Mrs. Patterson ordered. "Come on, Sarah," one of the guards said gently, putting a hand on her shoulder. "Let's go." Sarah looked around at her coworkers. Maria was crying. Tom shook his head in disbelief. Other cleaners watched with sad eyes, knowing there was nothing they could do. As the guards walked Sarah toward the exit, her legs felt like they might give out. 3 years of hard work, gone in an instant. How would she pay rent? How would she buy Emma's medication? What was she going to tell her daughter? The doors closed behind her, and Sarah found herself standing outside on the street, alone, holding a termination letter and wondering how her life had fallen apart so quickly. All because she stopped to help someone. Later that afternoon, Sarah sat in a small coffee shop downtown, surrounded by printed job applications. Her eyes were red from crying, and her hands still trembled as she filled out form after form. She had $43 left to her name. Emma's medication was due in 5 days. Rent was due in 2 weeks. Sarah felt like she was drowning, and there was no one to pull her up. She took a sip of her cheap coffee and tried to focus on the application in front of her. Previous employer, reason for leaving. How was she supposed to explain this? The TV in the corner of the coffee shop was playing the evening news. Sarah wasn't paying attention until she heard a name that made her freeze. "Breaking news," the news anchor said. "Jonathan Richardson, billionaire CEO of Richardson Tech Company, was rescued this morning by a mysterious Good Samaritan after collapsing on the street." Sarah's head snapped up toward the TV screen. "Richardson suffered a diabetic emergency and says this woman saved his life," the anchor continued. "He's now searching for her to thank her personally." The screen changed to show security camera footage from a nearby building. And there, clear as day, was Sarah kneeling beside the injured man, pressing her scarf against his bleeding head. Sarah's coffee cup slipped from her hand and shattered on the floor. Hot coffee splashed everywhere, but she didn't even notice. Her mouth hung open in shock. That was my boss, she whispered to herself. The owner of the company? The news anchor kept talking. Mr. Richardson is currently recovering at Mercy Hospital and had this message for the woman who saved him. The screen switched to show Jonathan Richardson sitting in a hospital bed, a bandage wrapped around his head. He looked tired but alive. This woman stopped when everyone else walked by, Jonathan said, his voice emotional. She was clearly late for something important, but she stayed with me. She called for help. She made sure I was okay. The doctors told me that if she hadn't stopped, I would have died on that sidewalk. Sarah's hands covered her mouth. Tears started streaming down her face again, but this time they were different tears. I want to find her and thank her, Jonathan continued on the TV. If anyone knows her, please contact us. Her name is Sarah Miller, and she saved my life. The coffee shop seemed to spin around Sarah. The man she saved was Jonathan Richardson, the billionaire who owned Richardson Tech Company. The man who owned the building she'd just been kicked out of. The man whose company had just fired her for being late to save his life. Sarah sat there, frozen, not knowing what to do. Should she call? Should she go to the hospital? Would he even believe her? And more importantly, would it even matter? She was already fired. The termination letter was already signed. But then she thought about Emma. She thought about the medication. She thought about the rent. And she thought about the fact that maybe, just maybe, this was the miracle she'd been praying for. Sarah pulled out her phone with shaking hands and stared at the screen, trying to decide what to do next. The next morning, Sarah stood outside Richardson Tech Company, her stomach twisted in knots. She'd barely slept all night, going back and forth about whether she should come. But every time she looked at Emma sleeping peacefully in her bed, she knew she had to try. Sarah walked through those same doors she'd been escorted out of just yesterday. Her heart pounded with every step. She approached the front desk where a receptionist sat typing on her computer. "Excuse me," Sarah said, her voice shaky. "I need to speak with Mr. Richardson." The receptionist looked up, barely interested. "Do you have an appointment?" Sarah swallowed hard. "No, but I'm the woman from the news. I helped him yesterday." The receptionist's eyes went wide. She immediately grabbed the phone. "Yes, sir, she's here. The woman who saved you." "Yes, sir. Right away, sir." She hung up and looked at Sarah with completely different eyes. "Mr. Richardson will see you immediately. Take the elevator to the top floor." Sarah's hands were sweating as the elevator climbed higher and higher. When the doors opened, she stepped onto the executive floor, a place she'd only cleaned late at night when no one was around. And then she saw him. Jonathan Richardson walked out of his office, a white bandage wrapped around his head. The moment he saw Sarah, his entire face lit up like he'd just seen a miracle. "Sarah Miller," he said, walking quickly toward her. "I've been looking everywhere for you." Sarah felt small standing in front of this powerful man. "Sir, I didn't know it was you. I just wanted to help." Jonathan's eyes filled with emotion. "Because of you, I'm alive. The doctors told me that if you hadn't stopped, if you hadn't called for help and stayed with me, I wouldn't have made it. Another 10 minutes and I would have died on that sidewalk." Sarah started crying. All the fear, all the stress, all the worry from the past day came pouring out. "I'm so sorry I was late to work. I lost my job because of it." Jonathan's expression changed instantly. His smile disappeared. "You were fired? For saving my life?" Sarah nodded, wiping tears from her face. "Mrs. Patterson said I was unreliable." Jonathan's jaw clenched. He turned and called out to his assistant. "Get Mrs. Patterson up here right now." 5 minutes later, Mrs. Patterson stepped off the elevator, looking confident and professional. But the moment she saw Sarah standing next to Mr. Richardson, her face went pale. "Mrs. Patterson," Jonathan said, his voice calm but firm. "You fired the woman who saved my life. The woman who has worked here for 3 years without a single complaint. You fired her because she was late helping someone." Mrs. Patterson's mouth opened and closed like a fish. "Sir, I didn't know." "You didn't ask either," Jonathan said. "Sarah is everything this company should be about: kindness, integrity, and selflessness. She risked her job to save a stranger's life. And you punished her for it." Mrs. Patterson tried to speak, but Jonathan raised his hand. "You're fired. Clear your desk." Mrs. Patterson stood there in shock as security, the same guards who'd escorted Sarah out yesterday, came to escort her out today. Sarah watched as the woman who'd destroyed her life walked past her with tears of shame in her eyes. Jonathan turned back to Sarah. His expression softened. "Sarah, I can't give you your cleaning job back." Sarah's heart sank. Even after everything, she was still going to be jobless. She nodded, trying not to cry again. But then Jonathan smiled. Because I'm offering you something better. I want you to lead our new community outreach program. You'll help employees who are struggling, create support systems, and make sure no one here is ever afraid to do the right thing. The salary is $75,000 a year, with full medical benefits for you and Emma. Sarah couldn't breathe. She couldn't speak. $75,000? Medical benefits? This couldn't be real. I don't have a college degree, sir, she whispered. Jonathan smiled warmly and put a hand on her shoulder. You have something better, a good heart. That's what this company needs. That's what the world needs. Sarah broke down crying, but this time they were tears of joy. 3 months passed like a beautiful dream Sarah never wanted to wake up from. Sarah sat in her own office on the executive floor of Richardson Tech Company. It had her name on the door, Sarah Miller, Director of Community Outreach. Every morning when she walked in and saw that nameplate, she had to remind herself it was real. On her desk sat a framed photo of her and Emma. In the picture, Emma was laughing, her cheeks full of color, holding her new inhaler. For the first time in years, Sarah didn't have to choose between rent and medication. She didn't have to skip meals so Emma could eat. She didn't have to wear shoes with holes in them or work double shifts just to survive. That afternoon, Sarah sat across from Michael, a warehouse worker who'd missed work because his son was in the hospital. He was terrified he'd lose his job. Michael, you're not going to be fired, Sarah said gently. Your son needs you. That's what matters. We're going to make sure you have the time off you need, and we're going to help with the medical bills through our Employee Assistance Fund. Michael broke down in tears, just like Sarah had done 3 months earlier. Thank you, he whispered. You don't know what this means to my family. But Sarah did know. She knew exactly what it meant. As Michael left her office, Sarah looked out her window at the city below. She could see the street corner where she'd found Jonathan that morning. The corner where her entire life had changed. Just then, Jonathan Richardson walked past her office. He glanced in, caught her eye, and smiled. Sarah smiled back and nodded. No words were needed. They both knew what that moment meant. Sarah thought back to that morning, standing at the bus stop, watching that injured man on the ground while everyone else walked past. She remembered the voice in her head saying, if you stop, you'll be late. If you're late, you'll lose your job. I almost walked past him that morning, Sarah whispered to herself. I'm so glad I didn't. Sometimes the right choice is the hard choice, but it's always worth it. Sarah's kindness didn't just save a life, it changed her own forever. She went from being a struggling single mother who couldn't afford her daughter's medication to a woman who now helped hundreds of employees facing the same struggles she once faced. And it all happened because she chose to stop. Because she chose kindness over convenience. Because she chose to help when everyone else walked away. So remember this story the next time you see someone who needs help. Remember Sarah Miller. Because you never know how one good deed might come back to you. You never know whose life you might save, or how saving their life might end up saving yours. The smallest act of kindness can create the biggest change. Never forget that. If this story inspired you, do me one last favor, hit that subscribe button so you never miss stories like this one. And share this video with someone who needs a reminder that good things happen to good people.